All right, today we're talking about Michael Huemer's essay, Is There a Right to Own a Gun? Huemer's answer is definitely yes. Here's Huemer. He's written a lot of books about a lot of different topics. We'll also be reading his defense of drug legalization. Now here's Huemer's basic claim. His basic claim is that individuals have a prima facie right to own firearms, that this right is weighty and protects important interests, and that it's not overridden by utilitarian considerations. In other words, what he's going to be doing is weighing our prima facie right to own a gun against the social costs of widespread gun ownership and asking, are those social costs so significant, so harmful, that they outweigh our right to own a gun and override them? And his answer will be no, they are not. Now, first of all, we've got to talk a little bit about terminology of rights. McMahon, in our last reading, distinguished between fundamental and derivative rights, and Huemer is also going to use that same distinction. A fundamental right is one that you have that's not based on any other right. A derivative right is a right that you have in part because of its relationship to another deeper right. Now, according to Huemer, the right to own a gun is both fundamental and derivative. And that is, even if there were no other relevant rights here at all, you would have a right to own a gun. It's fundamental. However, it also derives more support from the fact of its connection to your right to self-defense. Owning a gun is a way of defending yourself, and so it also gets an important amount of its weight from its connection to that right. In fact, he thinks that's its most important aspect. Now, Huemer doesn't think that your right to own a gun is absolute, that nothing could possibly ever override it. In fact, Huemer doesn't think that any rights are absolute like that, probably. All that he's claiming is that you have a prima facie right to own a gun. That is, that other things being equal, you do have this right. This right has to be given some weight in moral deliberation. Sure, possibly it could be outweighed by more important concerns, but it's got to be outweighed because it has some weight of itself. So why does he think that we have a prima facie right to own a gun? Well, he thinks that that just follows from the presumption in favor of liberty. We should always assume, he says, that we have the right to do something, unless there are reasons why we can't. The burden of proof is on anyone who wants to restrict our liberty. So, for example, you might think, I have a prima facie right to own a car, or own a horse, or watch Netflix all day today. You might think that, yeah, I can do whatever I want, unless there's some reason why I can't. Now, maybe there are weighty reasons why I can't watch Netflix today. For example, I have a duty to grade papers, as it turns out. But the presumption should be, yes, you do have a right to do something, unless there is some much weightier reason why you can't. And he thinks, therefore, we ought to presume that you have a right to own a gun, unless, of course, there are very weighty considerations that may outweigh it. Now, what sorts of things would you not have a prima facie right to do? Well, you might not have a prima facie right to hurt other people, or to violate their rights, or to put them at risk or in danger. You don't have a prima facie right to do that stuff. But anything that's not hurting other people or violating their rights or putting them at risk, you do have a prima facie right to do, says Huemer. All right, so you might say, for example, that, well, gun ownership, it harms other people or it violates their rights. And Huemer wants to say, no, it doesn't. Certainly owning a gun makes it easier to harm other people if you wanted to, or to violate their rights or use them without their consent. But gun ownership by itself doesn't do any of those things. I might own guns and bury them in my backyard. It doesn't hurt anybody. Does gun ownership impose unacceptable, even if unintended, risks on others? For example, if I drive my car 150 miles an hour down Main Street, even if I don't intend to hit anybody or to hurt anybody, I'm putting them at unacceptable. I'm taking an unacceptable risk with other people's lives. Is the same thing true of gun ownership? Huemer says no. Huemer says the accidental death rate for firearms is 0.3 per 100,000. That's not an unacceptable unintended risk. Normal people are extremely unlikely, he says, to commit murder, even if the means are available. Only a tiny fraction of gun owners plan to commit crimes with guns. Now, you might say at this point, well, okay, but the total social cost of widespread gun ownership is so high that overrides your prima facie right to own a gun. He says that may be, but that doesn't eliminate the fact that I do have a prima facie right in the first place that needs to be overridden. We can debate whether or not the total social costs really do outweigh that right. And that's what he wants to do now. So for this next part of the essay, he wants to talk about what are the costs and benefits, the upsides and downsides of this right to own a gun. Upsides, there's recreational value to it. A lot of people have guns, a lot of people really enjoy them, and although it's hard to quantify, you got to take that into consideration. If you ban guns, you're going to be inflicting harms on a lot of people. Most importantly, though, is this connection between gun ownership and self-defense. Here's how a simple argument goes. The right of self-defense is an important right. If you want to see how important it is, just think about this. What if you're being attacked by someone and I hold you down while they murder you? Well, what did I do? I prevented you from preventing your own death. I violated your right of self-defense. How bad is that? Well, it's real bad. I'm an accomplice to murder. I'm basically as bad as the murderer himself. So the right of self-defense is very weighty. Secondly, he says a firearms prohibition would be a significant violation of the right of self-defense. This is a premise which McMahon, of course, would reject. But here's how Huemer wants to defend it. He says, look, think about this. What if a murderer is coming to attack you? You've got a loaded pistol by your bed. You know how to use it. But just as you reach for that gun to protect yourself against the murderer, I take it away from you so that you have nothing to defend yourself and you die. Again, what have I done? Taking somebody's gun when they're under deadly attack, again, prevents them from preventing their own death. And that's very significant violation of their rights. So that's, he says, if the government were to prohibit firearms, if they were to ban guns, legal gun ownership, that's what they'd be doing. They'd be taking someone's gun away so they could not defend themselves in case of attack. And that would be a very serious rights violation. Now you might think, whoa, hold on. A government gun ban would be totally different from me taking someone's pistol away while a murderer was attacking them. And there's several ways you might cash out this objection. But Huemer wants to respond to all of these. Let me start from the end. You might say, you have time to find other methods of self-defense if the government enacts a gun ban. You know, you can go out and buy nunchucks, buy a watchdog, I don't know, practice with Chinese stars, whatever your favorite non-firearm method of self-defense is. But Huemer wants to say, really nothing is as effective as a gun. There aren't any comparable methods of self-defense. Just think about if you're, an elderly person who doesn't have any physical strength or probably time to practice with nunchucks. You could wield a gun, but probably nothing else is going to work for you against a serious attacker. You might say, well, we don't know specifically who's going to be harmed by a gun ban. We might know that some people are going to die because they can't defend themselves with guns, but we don't know who that is. And he says that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that you don't know who's going to die. The point is you took somebody's guns away and you know people are going to die. It doesn't matter if you don't know specifically who it is. You might say, well, we're not certain that people will die without guns. And he thinks statistically we're absolutely certain of that people will be fatally attacked and people who would have been able to defend themselves with guns will not be able to. Does it matter that the threat's not imminent, that there's no attacker immediately standing over you when the government takes your guns away? He says it's not relevant because, if I took your guns away from you a week before or a year before a murderer attacked you, I would in fact been doing the same thing. I'd be just as much of an accomplice as before. So none of these differences are morally relevant, he thinks. Now, this first point might be the weightiest, because the objector, Jeff McMahon, might want to say this. Look, a gun ban is different than just taking someone's pistol away when they're under attack. Why? Because a gun ban is saving the lives of others. The claim here is that self-defense rights of non-criminal gun owners are overridden by the state's need to protect society from criminal gun owners. Now, he's going to address that in a later section towards the end in his most important argument, but we'll get there. We're not there yet. Okay, he wants to talk about some other statistics here. First of all, he says people often claim that a gun kept in the home is 43 times more likely to be used in a suicide or criminal homicide or accidental death than it is to kill an intruder in self-defense. He says that stat is misleading. It leaves out cases in which crimes are stopped by a gun without killing anyone. And he also says, well, a large percentage of those are suicides, which need to be treated separately. What about this claim that other developed countries that don't have the gun laws that we do have much lower rates of murder and violent crime? He says actually the stats aren't quite as clear when you start comparing American jurisdictions, which have more permissive versus more restrictive gun laws, or higher or lower ownership rates. It's not at all clear, he says, that guns are to blame for the rates of violence. And he wants to say that defensive gun use outnumbers crimes committed with guns by a ratio of about 3 to 1. But here's his most important point. He wants to say a gun ban, in order to be justified morally, would have to have much, much, much greater benefits than the harms that it inflicted. And here's how he goes. He wants to say it is wrong to murder a person, even to prevent several other killings. So think about that criticism of consequentialism. The criticism went like this. If consequentialism is true, then it would be permissible to lynch one innocent person if by doing so we could save 3 or 10 more. Well, but many people want to say it's never wrong to kill the innocent, even if it's going to save more people. That's a critique of consequentialism. That's the kind of point he's making right here. It's wrong to murder people even to prevent other murders. But a violation of a person or a group's right of self-defense, which would predictably result in the death of one of the victims, is morally comparable to murder. Why? Because you're taking away their guns, their way of defending themselves in the face of attack. Now, if it's wrong to commit murder to prevent several killings, then it's wrong to commit a rights violation, which is comparable to murder, in order to prevent several killings. And therefore, it is wrong to violate a person or a group's right of self-defense when that's predictably going to result in the death of one of the victims, even in order to prevent several other killings. Now, therefore, that means it's wrong to violate a group of people's right of self-defense, predictably resulting in the deaths of many victims, even to prevent several times as many killings. A gun prohibition would definitely violate a group of people's right of self-defense, and it would predictably result in the deaths of many victims. And therefore, a gun prohibition is wrong, even if it would prevent several times as many killings as it contributed to. Now, let me give you an illustration here. In 2018, 2 prisoners escaped from the Pickens County Jail. True story. In the middle of the night, one of them kicks in the door of a nearby home, arms himself with a metal tool in the kitchen, and heads towards the bedroom door of the homeowner, who was a lady living alone who had no way of escape. The woman fired a single shot from a handgun she owned, which struck him in the head and killed him. Okay, now think about this. If guns are legal, let's say the Pickens lady is able to survive because she can kill her attacker. But there might be a cost, because if guns are legal and widespread, you might have 3 other innocent people in Pickens County that are killed by gun violence. If you ban guns, the Pickens lady doesn't have that handgun by her bed. She gets killed by her attacker. But 3 other innocent people who would have otherwise been killed by gun violence might survive. Now the question is it worth the cost? Is the gun ban morally justified? What if the ratio is 1 to 30? 1 to 300, 1 to 3 million. What if the Pickens lady was your mother? Huemer says not worth it.